January 3, 2026, will be remembered as the morning the map of power in the Western Hemisphere quietly cracked open, because while most of the world slept, something unprecedented was already in motion beneath a moonless Caribbean sky. Before dawn could expose what had happened, the United States executed a move so precise and so daring that its consequences will echo for decades. The news didn't arrive all at once. It leaked through encrypted military channels, then quietly surfaced on classified briefings, before finally detonating across global news tickers. President Donald Trump confirmed it himself. Nicolás Maduro, along with his wife Cilia Flores, had been captured and were en route to American soil to face trial. No invasion, no occupation, just extraction. To grasp the magnitude of what just happened, you have to understand what didn't happen. There were no armored columns rolling through Caracas, no amphibious landings on La Guaira's beaches, no televised shock-and-awe campaign like Panama in 1989 or Iraq in 2003. Instead, this operation reflected a colder, more surgical doctrine: leadership decapitation taken to its ultimate form. Runways were created to keep fighter jets grounded. Hardened bunkers around Miraflores Palace were neutralized. Communications between Caracas and military units deeper inland were severed. The Venezuelan state didn't collapse, it froze, and in that paralysis, the real strike began. Within minutes, the target was secured. Before loyalist units or paramilitary groups could even coordinate, the extraction was complete. Maduro was gone, not dead, not hiding, gone, and that distinction matters more than it seems. This operation sent a message that reached far beyond Venezuela's borders. Geography, once a shield, no longer guarantees safety. Alliances, once deterrents, no longer ensure protection. If the political will exists, even the most fortified capitals are vulnerable. That repetition reveals something unsettling: a pattern, a psychological doctrine, a preference for beginning the political year with decisive, irreversible action that forces the world to react rather than respond. When the year opens with shock, momentum follows. But this story didn't begin last night, or even this century. To understand how Venezuela arrived at this moment, how a nation became vulnerable to such a strike, we have to go back through 2 centuries of ambition, oil, betrayal, and revolution. That belief traces back to Simon Bolivar, the liberator born on Venezuelan soil. In 1819 he forged Gran Colombia, a massive republic uniting modern-day Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. Though it collapsed within a decade, the dream never died. For much of the 20th century, that ambition aligned with the United States. The discovery of vast oil reserves in the Lake Maracaibo Basin transformed Venezuela from an agrarian state into an energy superpower. American companies flooded in. Money followed. Influence followed faster. By World War II, Venezuela was fueling the Allied war machine. In the post-war era, it became a rare democratic anchor in a region plagued by coups and juntas. As a founding member of OPEC, it helped reshape global energy markets, pumping over 3 million barrels a day during its peak. Oil created wealth, but it also created dependence. When prices crashed in the 1980s, the illusion collapsed. Government revenues evaporated. Social programs were slashed. Poverty surged. The middle class disintegrated, and resentment fermented. That anger found its voice in 1992, when a little-known lieutenant colonel named Hugo Chavez attempted a coup. It failed, but his brief televised address, where he accepted responsibility and promised change for now, electrified the nation. Released from prison 2 years later, Chavez rode that fury straight into the presidency in 1998. What followed would permanently sever Venezuela's relationship with the United States and set the country on a collision course with the moment we witness today. And as oil revenues soared in the 2000s, Chavez used the money not to strengthen institutions, but to entrench loyalty. When he died in 2013, he left behind a polarized nation, a hollowed-out economy, and a hand-picked successor who lacked both his charisma and his luck. Nicolás Maduro. For years, Maduro survived. As this first chapter closes, we're standing at the edge of something far more dangerous than victory. The head of the regime has been removed, but the body remains, armed, fragmented, watching, because while Maduro is gone, the military, the paramilitaries, and the criminal networks he empowered are still very much alive. And what comes next will determine whether Venezuela is reborn or broken beyond repair. The removal of Nicolás Maduro didn't bring closure, it opened a vacuum, and history has never been kind to nations standing over one. The moment the helicopters vanished into the Caribbean night, a silent countdown began inside Venezuela. Because regimes built around a single man rarely survive his sudden absence without consequences. As dawn broke over Caracas, the country's power structure stood frozen, unsure whether to fight, flee, or negotiate. The Chavista system had never been designed to function without its figurehead. Loyalty flowed upward, not outward. And now, at the center of it all, there was nothing but empty air. The most revealing signal came within hours. Venezuela's Minister of Defense, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, appeared on state television flanked by the military high command. His expression was tense, controlled, almost cautious. There were no threats of retaliation, no calls for holy war against the United States. Instead, he urged calm, declared a state of emergency, and instructed the armed forces to maintain order. That restraint spoke volumes. It suggested paralysis, not resolve. For years, Venezuela's generals had thrived inside a system of corruption that rewarded silence and loyalty. They controlled oil services, food distribution, mining, concessions, entire shadow economies. These were not ideologues. They were businessmen in uniform, and now they were calculating. A direct confrontation with the United States would guarantee annihilation, but cooperation, quiet, discreet cooperation, might offer survival, amnesty, exile, a future beyond prison cells. Washington understands this calculus well. Leadership decapitation only works if the layers beneath the leader see a deal as preferable to defiance. Behind closed doors, secure lines were almost certainly already open. The message would be simple and brutal: turn on what remains of the regime, facilitate a transition, and you might avoid sharing a cell with the man you once served. But Venezuela's armed forces are not a single organism. While the high command hesitates, the real danger lurks below them. The mid-level officers, the idiot, and most of all, to colectivos. These paramilitary gangs were born under Chavez and empowered under Maduro to defend the revolution at any cost. They control entire neighborhoods in Caracas and other major cities. They are heavily armed, deeply ideological, and unaccountable. Unlike the generals, they have nothing offshore. No exit plan, no retirement. For them, Maduro's capture isn't a political shift, it's an existential threat, and that makes them unpredictable. The nightmare scenario is already clear: fragmented authority, defiant militias, and urban warfare erupting block by block. A slow descent into chaos that could force deep American involvement, the very outcome Washington hoped to avoid. Into this unstable landscape steps a figure who has spent decades waiting for this moment: Maria Corina Machado. She is the iron spine of Venezuela's opposition. For years, she endured bans, intimidation, and physical attacks. While others compromised or fled, she stayed. When Juan Guaido's interim government collapsed and the opposition fractured, Machado rebuilt its moral center. In 2023, she reignited a movement many believed was dead. Despite being barred from holding office by regime-controlled courts, she became the face of resistance. In 2024, when the regime openly stole the election, Machado refused to legitimize the lie, and in doing so, she emerged as the one leader with real credibility. Machado represents everything the Chavista system fears. She is openly pro-West, pro-market. She supports privatizing the oil sector, dismantling the criminal state, and severing ties with Russia and China. For years, she has prepared detailed plans for economic stabilization and institutional recovery. But plans alone don't confer power. In Venezuela, power flows through the barrel of a gun, and that means Machado's future and the country's still hinges on the military. The United States envisions a transitional council, opposition technocrats, non-criminal military figures, and international oversight. A temporary structure meant to stabilize the nation, restore basic services, and prepare for free elections. It's the cleanest possible path: controlled dismantling, no collapse, no vengeance, just transition. But history rarely cooperates. Iraq offers a warning. Saddam Hussein fell quickly, but the failure to manage internal fractures unleashed a decade of insurgency. Libya offers another lesson: remove the dictator without securing the aftermath, and the state dissolves into armed chaos. Venezuela carries its own unique risks. The country is saturated with weapons. Its borders bleed into Colombia, where guerrilla groups like the ELN and dissident FARC factions have operated freely for years. These groups will not abandon their safe haven without resistance. Then there's the geopolitical dimension. Russia and China have invested billions into Venezuela. Moscow sees it as a strategic thorn in Washington's side. Beijing sees it as a long-term energy asset. Neither will intervene militarily, but both can sabotage stability. They can block legitimacy at the United Nations, fuel cyber disruptions, quietly support insurgent actors, make Venezuela ungovernable without ever firing a shot. And looming over all of this is migration. Nearly 8 million Venezuelans have already fled. Another wave triggered by violence or prolonged instability would destabilize Colombia, Brazil, and push pressure directly onto the U.S. southern border. By removing Maduro, Washington has assumed ownership of the crisis. The old rule applies now: you break it, you buy it. Rebuilding Venezuela will be monumental. The oil infrastructure is decayed. Refineries are rusted shells. Pipelines leak. Restoring production will require tens of billions of dollars and years of work, but the reward is massive. Venezuela still holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth in a stable environment. Western energy giants would rush back. A revived Venezuelan oil sector would reshape global energy markets and further isolate Russia and Iran. This economic promise is the carrot being dangled before Venezuelan elites and international partners alike: prosperity, legitimacy, reintegration. But between that vision and today lies a minefield of armed actors, wounded pride, and unresolved loyalties. Latin America is already reacting. Leftist governments across the region are condemning the operation as imperial overreach. Anti-American sentiment may surge. Diplomacy will become more complicated, and leaders like Colombia's Gustavo Petro now walk a razor's edge between ideology and reality as Venezuela enters its most uncertain chapter. Everything depends on the next few days. Will the military fracture or unify? Will the streets remain calm or ignite? Will the opposition seize this moment or squander it? Maduro's capture ended a dictatorship, but the system he built still breathes. Reconciling the two Venezuelas, the one celebrating liberation and the one mourning revolution, may take a generation. As the initial shock of Maduro's capture begins to fade, Venezuela now enters the most dangerous phase of this entire operation, the moment when adrenaline gives way to reality, and power must reassemble itself from the wreckage. History shows that this is where revolutions either stabilize or implode. With Maduro sitting in an American detention facility, the men who enabled his rule are still very much on Venezuelan soil, and among them, one figure towers above the rest in importance. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez. He is not just a general, he is the linchpin holding together a fractured military apparatus that was never meant to survive without its political master. Padrino's early restraint wasn't weakness, it was calculation. For years, he and his peers operated as power brokers rather than soldiers, profiting from oil contracts, logistics monopolies, and illicit trade routes. Their loyalty to Maduro was transactional, not ideological. With him gone, that transaction is void. Now they face an impossible choice: resist and risk annihilation, or negotiate and preserve what remains of their wealth and influence. Every hour that passes without open conflict suggests that this internal debate is raging behind closed doors. But while the generals calculate, Venezuela's streets remain a powder keg. The colectivos, the armed civilian militias embedded in the barrios, are watching closely. These groups were built to defend the revolution at all costs. They were indoctrinated, armed, and unleashed precisely for moments like this. Unlike the generals, they don't own foreign real estate or offshore accounts. Their identity is the regime if they choose violence. Caracas could become ungovernable overnight. Urban warfare doesn't require tanks or air power. It thrives on alleyways, rooftops, and fear. A handful of committed fighters can paralyze a city of millions, and if chaos spreads, the pressure on the United States to intervene again, this time openly, would be immense. Maria Corina Machado understands this better than anyone. For decades, she has positioned herself not as a revolutionary, but as a restorer. Her message isn't vengeance, it's reconstruction. Law, order, markets, institutions, and critically, reintegration with the democratic world. Her credibility comes from consistency. While others shifted alliances or compromised, she didn't. That has earned her loyalty across civil society, business leaders, and the diaspora. But legitimacy on paper doesn't automatically translate into control on the ground. To govern, she needs the military's passive acceptance, not loyalty, just neutrality. The goal is speed. Restore basic services, stabilize the currency, open humanitarian corridors, signal to the population in the world that chaos is not inevitable. Every delay increases the odds of fragmentation, because outside Venezuela's borders, eyes are watching and some are sharpening knives. Russia may not mourn Maduro personally, but it will not quietly surrender its strategic foothold. Expect disinformation campaigns, cyber disruptions, and diplomatic sabotage. China will move more subtly, leveraging debt and contracts to preserve influence. Neither needs Venezuela to collapse. They only need it unstable enough to deny Washington a clean victory. And then there's the migration clock. Another collapse would send millions more northward. The Trump administration knows this. The pressure to show rapid stabilization is immense, not just geopolitically, but domestically. This is the hidden risk of decisive action. Removing a dictator is fast. Rebuilding a nation is slow. Venezuela's oil sector illustrates this perfectly. On paper, the country should be rich. In reality, its infrastructure is shattered. Restarting production isn't a political decision, it's an engineering marathon. Years of neglect can't be reversed with executive orders, but if stability holds, the upside is enormous. Western energy companies are already watching. A revived Venezuelan oil industry would reshape global supply chains and undercut authoritarian exporters elsewhere. That promise is what keeps the international community cautiously optimistic. Still, optimism doesn't stop bullets. The coming days will reveal whether Venezuela chooses order or fragmentation, whether generals strike deals or defect, whether militias stand down or ignite. The revolution's symbol has been removed, but symbols leave shadows, and as night falls over Caracas once again, the country waits holding its breath to see who steps forward to claim the future. As Venezuela stands at this crossroads, the final outcome is no longer dictated by helicopters or precision strikes, but by decisions made in silence inside military headquarters, opposition safe rooms, and foreign capitals weighing risk against reward. This is where history slows down and consequences deepen. The capture of Nicolás Maduro marked the definitive end of a personalist dictatorship, but it did not erase the system he constructed. Chavismo was never just a man. It was a network political criminal, ideological woven into every layer of the state. Removing the head exposed the wiring, but it didn't dismantle it. For millions of Venezuelans, this moment feels surreal. Some celebrate openly, seeing liberation where there was once despair. Others watch with fear and anger, convinced their revolution has been stolen by foreign hands. These two realities now coexist, separated not by borders but by belief. Reconciling them will be the hardest task of all. What happens next will define not only Venezuela's future, but the credibility of American power in the 21st century. A stable transition would reinforce the message that decisive action works. A descent into chaos would echo the failures of past interventions and embolden rivals watching from afar. Latin America is already absorbing the shock. Governments sympathetic to the left are condemning the operation, warning of revived imperialism. Others, more quietly, are reassessing their own vulnerabilities. The Monroe Doctrine, long treated as historical rhetoric, has returned as a living policy, and the region knows it. Globally, the signal is unmistakable. Distance no longer guarantees safety. Alliances no longer ensure immunity. The rules that govern sovereignty for decades are being tested by a power willing to bypass norms in the name of security. Inside Venezuela, the clock is ticking. If a credible transitional authority emerges quickly, backed by military neutrality and international legitimacy, the country may finally begin the long process of recovery. If it doesn't, fragmentation will fill the void. Oil, once the nation's curse, could become its redemption. If institutions return before opportunists do, the resources are still there. The people are still there. What's missing is trust. And trust cannot be imposed by force. As the dust settles from this unprecedented operation, one truth becomes unavoidable. The hardest part of regime change isn't removing a ruler. It's deciding what replaces him. Venezuela's future will not be written by the helicopters that flew away into the night, but by the choices made in their absence. Whether this moment becomes the foundation of renewal or the spark of prolonged chaos remains unknown. What is certain is this: the world has changed. The rules have shifted. And on January 3, 2026, a line was crossed that cannot be uncrossed. The Venezuelan sky is quiet now, too quiet, and as a nation looks upward, searching for signs of what comes next, one question hangs heavier than all the rest: were they saved, or merely handed a different kind of uncertainty? History is watching, and the answer is about to be written.